I don't know what I expected exactly going into Alien Covenant. Prometheus left a sour taste in my mouth, and with this being pretty much a direct sequel, I did not have high hopes. But I was in for a surprise because not only did I like Alien Covenant, I think I might genuinely love it. This movie does a lot of the same things that Prometheus did, but it does them all so much better. I should mention that the retreading of familiar ground is a criticism often levied against this film. Covenant is a generally disliked entry in the series as far as I can tell. But I feel like every entry in this series is a reiteration of what we've seen before. It's the same story with a few changes to keep them somewhat distinct. But honestly, to me, Covenant is the one that tells the best version of the story. The original Alien will, of course, always be held as the best in the series. Partly because it's good, but also because it's the original. It was a new and inventive movie with a fresh and interesting story, something Covenant doesn't benefit from. So what Covenant does instead is it takes all these elements from previous entries and does them really well. Everything in this movie is so well crafted. The cinematography is great, everything looks so good. The effects are fantastic, I love the way the alien looks and moves in this film, and the score is probably the best in the series. The actors all do a phenomenal job, and the writing is solid. Prometheus had interesting ideas, but it was bogged down by the sheer stupidity present in the script. The dialogue is unnatural and off-putting, and the characters just keep making the worst decisions imaginable. Covenant keeps the interesting ideas, but exchanges the corny and frustrating script of its predecessor for a far better one where the characters actually make sound decisions. The plot does hinge on an incredibly unlikely coincidence. That part kinda made me roll my eyes, but beyond that, pretty much everything makes a decent amount of sense. The crew go to this planet because it seems like the best decision. The planet shows great promise, and there's also the fact that there's apparently a human there sending out a weird distress call. There's plenty of bad decisions made in this movie, but they're all made for good reasons, and there's usually some kind of argument about whether it's really the best choice. Daniels voices her concerns to Orym, saying she thinks they should stick to the original plan. He seems dismissive, but it's only because he's hiding his doubt to come across as a confident leader. It clearly bothers him that Daniels thinks it's a bad idea. When Tennessee brings the Covenant down to the planet, the rest of the crew argue with him, and while you might disagree with Tennessee's choice, you understand why he's making that choice. When Ferris locks Karine in the medbay and blows up the ship, she's making bad decisions, but you still understand why. Because the movie does such a good job of showing exactly how terrifying the situation is. If someone came back to my ship with an alien infection like this, I would be just as scared. I might very well have done the same thing as Ferris. The part where she blows up the ship could easily have been an eye-roll moment. If done differently, it was kind of bordering on that, but I mean, she just saw this demonic little imp tear apart her friends and now it's running directly at her. Of course she would start shooting. The whole medbay scene is also so well done. The minimalist score pumping in the background accompanying probably the most disturbing alien bursting out scene that we've ever gotten. And the moment this xenomorph leaves its host, it begins to wreak havoc. This ties into two other points I have about this movie, one being a criticism and one being praise. My criticism is that it bothers me how fast the xenomorph develops, like there was maybe 2 hours at most between conception and it being developed enough to go on a killing spree. I find it more excusable than in Prometheus though, where this squid somehow quadrupled its body mass without eating anything. Like there was nothing in the medbay for it to eat, and I don't care how perfect of an organism you are, you still can't build organic tissue out of air. Covenant at least has the excuse of the very visible way that the incubation is messing up the host's body. My praise though is in regards to the behavior of the xenomorphs. The Alien franchise makes a big deal of calling these guys the perfect organisms, especially with Prometheus sort of implying that the xenomorphs were intended to be humanity's successors. But why? They're robust creatures and efficient hunters, but what do? A lot of animals hunt and kill, but they do other stuff too. We've never seen the xenomorphs behave like animals, they're just slasher monsters who exist to kill. So I really appreciate this scene between David and the xenomorph. It shows that they do actually have a capacity for some kind of social intelligence. This brings up a last point, which isn't really praise or criticism, it's just a question. If the engineers wanted to replace humanity with something better, why was their ideal successor an organism with no other function than murder and breeding? Seems like kind of a downgrade from a species gifted with the ability to do science and make art. But I guess maybe that's the point. Humanity replaced David, who was creative and inquisitive, with Walter, a far more simple-minded entity designed to only carry out menial tasks. So I suppose that's a parallel to what the engineers wanted to do with humanity. But David resents this. He looks down on Walter for being too simple and subservient. So with that in mind, I find his obsession with the xenomorphs kind of interesting. David is an incredibly compelling character and Michael Fassbender's performance is mesmerizing. Walter is interesting too, but he's really only a reflection of David. The androids have consistently been some of my favorite parts of the Alien movies. In the original Alien, I found this guy way scarier than the Xenomorph, so needless to say, I really like what Covenant does with David and Walter. Evil Corporation wants dangerous aliens, even though it always goes wrong, is a way less compelling driving force for the narrative in my mind than megalomaniacal android obsessed with creation. I've heard people make fun of this scene because, I don't know, because it's like, haha, it's gay.
And blow into the hole gently.
Like, yeah. It is gay. Congratulations on picking up on that. Did you think it was unintentional? This scene is very homosexual in the most literal way possible. David is, as mentioned, a bit of an egomaniac. He does have a weird, messed up affection for humans, in a way, but he also looks down on them.
He was human. Entirely unworthy of his creation. I pitied him at the end.
To him, his only hope of finding an equal is in a version of himself. As androids, David and Walter don't have sex, but this is definitely a sex scene. The atmospheric mood lighting, the tension between them, the dialogue, it's very intentional.
I'll do the fingering.
It's David's attempt at connecting with someone he hopes might understand him, but he's left disappointed because Walter doesn't understand. He's not like David. This interest in creation that has consumed David and driven him insane is just not present in Walter, so David rejects him, like he rejects everyone else. David's arrival on the homeworld is a fascinating scene to me. When I first saw it, I started laughing. Often when I laugh like that, it's in contempt of the movie, but not then. There was something so absurd to me, but also deeply intriguing about this one guy arriving on an alien homeworld, only to immediately eradicate their civilization. David isn't logical per se, he has no interest in asking questions, he just wants to spit in the face of his creator's creators, to prove that he's better than those who made him. And while it's completely insane, you kind of have to respect his audacity. This little man popping in one morning to, in less than 10 minutes, destroy the civilization of those who thought themselves superior to him. But it's not just that either, because David cries as he's doing it. It's a frighteningly ambiguous reaction. Does he cry because he feels remorse or sympathy? Or is he just crying because he's touched by a wondrous moment of creation? Maybe it's a bit of both. There's a strange duality to David, a self-contradictory dissonance. It's like there's a problem in his head that he's not able to really resolve. Walter says as much after noticing that David misremembered who wrote Ozymandias.
When one note is off, it eventually destroys the whole symphony, David.
Being corrected in this way shakes David to his core, but it only lasts a moment before he pushes it aside and changes topics. It's like a computer with a paradox it can't solve. At a certain point, just stops the task and moves on to a new inquiry.
My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair.
His fixation on the poem is also emblematic of his conflicted nature. In a way, it seems to represent the sadness that he attributes to the fall of the Engineer City, and perhaps also a pride that he feels in having shown just how easily a majestic civilization can fall. But it's also the poem itself. He seems to view the poem as a perfect piece of art, and his obsession with creation is in the hopes that he might create something just as powerful.
To compose something so majestic, one could die happy. If one died.
It goes without saying, but something inside David is very, very wrong. Walter also remarks that David was too human, a complication his model doesn't share. He's much simpler, but he's also content. Meanwhile, David is a tormented soul, just like humans are. Going back to our parallel, the xenomorphs never really express themselves, but perhaps they'd be content too if simply left alone. One of the things I was not expecting this movie to do was kind of redeem Prometheus in a way. I didn't particularly care for the soundtrack in Prometheus. The music on its own is really good, but it feels misplaced in that film, to the point where I kind of started getting annoyed whenever they played the main theme. But in Covenant, when David plays the Prometheus theme on the flute, that made me feel things. Especially when he calls it his elegy for Elizabeth Shaw, because that kind of recontextualizes Prometheus and its music in my mind. It becomes this sort of inevitably doomed tragedy far in the past, and becomes much more haunting and sad. It doesn't necessarily make me respect the movie more, but it does make me appreciate its role in the story more than I did before. I have complicated feelings regarding Shaw's fate. On the one hand, it's unsatisfying for her to die off screen when the last film ended with her going out on her adventure, but on the other hand, it's so unapologetic in its cynicism and mean-spiritedness that I kinda like it. This whole movie is cynical, and it feels almost bitter in a way that I honestly fuck with. Especially when you consider the ending. So let's talk about that. I think it gets a bit silly with the crane and Daniels hanging off the cargo ship, but it's done well enough that I don't really mind. The part on the Covenant itself also feels a bit tacked on. It probably would have annoyed me more if it weren't for David. I really like the David Walter twist because the movie never tries to outright trick you. Instead, it makes it entirely possible for it to be either of them. Michael Fassbender's acting is insane here in these scenes. He's done a good job earlier in the film separating Walter and David to the point where they really feel like different characters. But here he's able to ride that line between them. At first he feels like David here, but the way he reacts to the xenomorph smashing the camera feels more like Walter. When he sighs in relief, it feels like Walter at first, and then the camera lingers on this weirdly ambiguous face, just long enough to make you doubt. It adds an extra layer of suspense to the final confrontation, since you're not sure whether he's an ally or an enemy. And if it is David, what's he playing at? What's his plan here? At this point, Daniels has become very Ripley-like, and I've heard people complain about that too. I don't agree that it's a bad thing, and that's because of this ending. Ripley always triumphed in the end, except when she didn't, but still kinda did. Both in Alien and Aliens, she defeats the alien and goes into cryosleep, and it's a decently happy ending, all things considered. So with Daniel stepping into that role, you expect the same thing. At this point in the film, I was mostly on the, okay, well, I guess things turned out okay after all side of the fence. Especially because I wasn't sure that they would really go there after a happy ending like this. But then they subvert that and say, oh no, we're going there. And I love it. The fucking smile on David's face here is priceless. It's such a cruel ending for these characters, and normally I'm not a fan of unnecessarily cruel endings, but something about it here just kind of gets to me. I think part of why it works for me is because while I do find the main characters pretty likable, I'm not overly emotionally attached to them. The opening of Alien 3 feels like such a middle finger to the audience because you've really come to love these characters and they've earned their happy ending in Aliens. And then you just unceremoniously erase that in the sequel. But unlike in Alien 3, where there just happened to be facehuggers on board the ship for some reason, David has schemed, worked, and sacrificed to be here in this moment. This story doesn't belong to the crew of the Covenant, it belongs to David. Alien Covenant is a gorgeously cynical movie that does a lot of the same things as previous entries in the series, but it does them all so damn well, while using the audience's familiarity with the elements of the series to subvert expectations. There's so many good scenes, several of which I haven't talked about, the scene where they explore the engineer ship. I love the cosmic dread inherent in the concept of finding the remains of a lost human in an alien ship on an alien world where they have no right to be. I love when they stumble into the engineer city and it's just littered with corpses frozen in agony. That's more of the cosmic dread that I really like. And of course there's the chestburster scene. I'd heard the track that accompanies this scene before watching the movie, it's on one of my playlists, and I had never expected that it would accompany such a horrifying moment. But it does such a great job of portraying the moment as David perceives it, as something beautiful. Again, it's taking things that we've seen and portraying it in a different light. But there is another scene that I've neglected to mention, and I've put off talking about it because it unfortunately kind of ruins the whole movie. Can you guess which one it is? That's right, it's this one. I'm kidding, of course, this scene by no means ruins the movie, though it does have weird blocking. I get that it's meant to be kind of like a let's sit down and have a proper discussion thing, but I think it would feel way more natural if Daniels walked in and she's in the far end of the room standing, while Orm stands kind of by the door where he comes in. That way both the characters and the camera are more free to move around, and it'll be more dynamic. It's about the only genuine complaint I have. Oh, well, I guess there's that and the lack of decomposition. That's something that really annoyed me with Prometheus. Like, even if this head wasn't exposed to Detrivores, this thing has been here for thousands of years. There's no way it would still be as intact as it is. Even organic matter that doesn't strictly decompose still deteriorates, and the thing about them reactivating nerves, those nerves would definitely be long gone. In Alien Covenant, Corpse's Shaw is very intact considering she's been dead for a while. The only reason I can think of here is that line about the black goo killing all the animals, so I guess it could have affected the organisms that cause the decomposition. But if the black goo wiped out bacteria and fungi, then these plants really shouldn't be alive. But again, when the rest of the movie is as good as it is, I don't really mind this as much. Because watching this film was genuinely a really cool experience, and it's probably one of my all-time favorite sci-fi films now. I know a lot of people didn't care for it, but I hope that I've been able to give some new perspectives on it through this video. So that's about it for now, and thank you for watching. Oh, also, the James Franco cameo was really funny.